it takes a village to raise a child. What if that village is under-resourced? What if that village is facing different types of oppression? What if that village is going through gentrification and people are being displaced and moved into homeless shelters? What's going to happen with the children? Who's going to be, resourced enough and ready to raise them in the way that they need to be raised? I bring this up because I've worked across several communities across New York City, be it the South Bronx, East New York, Brownsville, Bedford-Stuyvesant. I've been everywhere. And though every community is very different and has its own unique fingerprint, there's one thing that they all had in common, and it was the symptoms of oppression. The reason why I'm so passionate about this is because it really hits home with me, my own personal experience, and everything that I've gone through in my career. So I ask you guys this question: are we there yet? What does there mean to you? And what must we do as a community to get there? So a little bit about myself before we dive into that. I'm going to put up a few people that inspire me. One is fiction, one is nonfiction. How many of you guys ever seen The Last Dragon? Raise your hand. All right, this is a classic. Growing up, I probably seen this movie about 25 times, so I know it by heart. But one of the things that I found really profound in this movie was that Bruce Leroy, the character right there, was sent on a mission by his sensei to find the master. So he works tirelessly to find his master. He looks everywhere. He's researching. He's traveling all around trying to find who this master is. And then when he finally gets there, he finds out that it's nothing but a fortune cookie machine. He felt lied to. He was livid. But it wasn't until he found a fortune cookie machine that he was able to go on his real mission. And eventually, he became a master himself. And a lot of you guys are probably wondering, what does Bruce Leroy and Harriet Tubman have in common? Right? So Harriet Tubman, a similar type of journey. When she wanted to be free, at first freedom was just about her and her family. Because she had to first experience how to gain freedom for herself first. So you guys know Harriet Tubman's story. She made it north. She became free. She came back. She got her family. But she realized that this doesn't feel right to me. How can I enjoy freedom in good conscience when I know that all my people are back home still struggling? So that's why she went back over and over and over again. And I feel close to both these stories because I achieved a level of success that I thought was what success was supposed to be. I made a lot of money. I made well over 6 figures. I had a lot of power. I had a great title. I owned my house in Bedford-Stuyvesant. So everything that my parents and my community told me is success, I felt like I accomplished that. But it didn't feel right to me. It's like something's missing. I worked for 5 large nonprofits over the course of my career. All 5 nonprofits were multi-million-dollar nonprofits. But the entire leadership, the executive staff and the board of directors were mostly white, and the communities they were serving were all black and brown youth. And the higher up I started to move in my career, the less people who looked like me were there. And many times, I was the only person of color in the room. And I think I had this moment where I was in a meeting, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, there's no one in here that looks like me. There's no one from the community that's in here talking about how these resources are going to be used in their communities. And I also had local youth organizations from our communities coming to me, asking me how to get funding. They're trying to run their programs, and they barely have 2 pennies to scrape together. But in the meantime, a lot of these outside, larger nonprofits are getting millions of dollars to serve their youth while they're being overlooked and marginalized. So I decided to do what Harriet Tubman did, and I stepped away from all of it. I resigned from my job. I wasn't too sure how it was all going to work out. I just knew that there was a different calling for me. I knew that I gained a lot of experience and expertise and knowledge that could help my community, and I wanted to bring that back and to be able to show them how to do it. So I wrote a proposal to create a model in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and it was funded. Someone said yes. It was funded, and February 2020 marks 1 year of us running programs in Bedford-Stuyvesant. We started off with 47 high school kids, and we're now serving 250 high school kids across 6 high schools in Brooklyn. So I want to go into oppression and what oppression means, and the definition of oppression, as you guys see up here. It's a situation in which people are governed in an unfair and cruel way and prevented from having opportunities and freedom. Iris Marion Young, she came up with the 5 faces of oppression. So basically, when oppression is happening, one of these 5 things are happening in a community, or to you. Violence, marginalization, exploitation, cultural imperialism, and powerlessness. So I want to start with violence. This one is a hard one for me, and I want to apologize to the TEDx team here because I was late with everything. They asked me for the script last week. I just got it to them last night. I was even late coming today. But the reason I realized while putting this together is that I'm still trying to get over some trauma that happened in my life as it relates to violence, oppressive violence. It wasn't physical violence, no one hit me or beat me up, but I've worked, there's been times in my career where I've seen people lose their jobs for talking about this kind of stuff. I've seen people be reprimanded for talking about oppression and how it relates to our communities. I've been in a position where I've had to reprimand people for talking about these kind of things in our communities. And all of these things were very, very traumatic for me, to the point where when I was trying to put this presentation together, I could barely think. I had like this block in my mind because I'm still trying to get through it. I'm still trying to get past it, to the point where I couldn't even get my information here on time. But I made it anyway, and the reason why I came and I continued and I wanted to talk about this is because it's important. And we can't allow ourselves to be silenced because of the things that's happened to us and our community and our ancestors. We must speak up. Because if I didn't come today and I would allow the fear of any type of backlash I would get from this talk, then things will never change, right? So with violence, like I spoke on a panel 2 weeks ago, and it was with the Robin Hood Foundation, and then this was a topic that they were talking about, oppression and different ways to support communities of color, and all of the panelists were Black and brown like myself, and we asked the moderator, can we be honest and tell the truth, or do we gotta be careful and walk on eggshells, right? The fact that we had to even ask that question in the first place means that it's not okay for us to tell the truth about what we're really going through and what our pain and our journey. It's not accepted. We get in trouble for it. We get told that how dare you bring that up? That's your problem, not ours. So as of 2 weeks ago, we're still afraid to talk about these kind of things. And the moderator said, no, please tell the truth. This is what this is about. Be yourself. And we're like, okay, so we all just kind of let everything out on the table. But with the model I designed in Bedford-Stuyvesant, the way that we counteract violence is that we work with our youth and we have to get them to believe in something. What makes you want to stand against violence and make a stand is that you have to be 100% sure what you're standing for and what you're fighting for. If you don't know what you're fighting for, you're not going to want to risk anything for it, right? And also, if you want to stand against violence, you need to feel like you have support in the community, in the village around you, that you know has your back and will stand with you. So with our students, we talk to them about systemic oppression, systemic racism, about how what's going on in their communities and the historical context behind it, and how it's not a coincidence that you're being pushed out into shelters because of gentrification. It's not a coincidence that you don't have healthy food, readily at your, readily for you to eat when you want to eat it, right? The second one is marginalization. So after I left my last job, I went to a town hall meeting in Bedford-Stuyvesant, and one of the things that they were discussing was how to build a shared economy in the arts for people of color. It was probably the most depressing meeting I ever went to in my life. And the reason why it was depressing was because no one knew any of the answers. And the meeting actually concluded with the moderator saying, well, there's just no resources out there. And before they ended the meeting, I stood up and I said, that's not true. I just left an arts education nonprofit that brought in $13 million a year to serve our kids. And I didn't hear one person bring up any of those funding sources that I know of and that I was a part of helping to bring to that organization. That's a result of marginalization. The fact that they don't even know that these funds exist. And even if you know they exist, there are certain policies put in place that make it even harder for you to be eligible to even get there, right? To even get the funding. So the New Prophet just posted a concept paper on funding in the social sector. Blacks and Latinos make up 30% of the US population, 10% of executive leadership roles, and we receive only 4% of all the funding that's out there, right? Only 4%. And most of the funds are funding our communities, but we're only getting 4%, right? So where's the other 94% going? To outside organizations who are making decisions on things that's happening in our communities. It's not always bad, because a lot of times when they get the funding, if they bring you to the table and the people from the community are part of the decision making around how those resources are used, that's a healthy way of being an outsider coming into a community. But a lot of times that's not always the case. The decisions are being made without the community being consulted with, and the community gets what they get. And in the meantime, the businesses that are already there don't have the funds to run their own programs. No. So I put no up there because I've had a lot of success with my programs over the past year, and a lot of people assume that I get a lot of yeses, that people are just giving me things. In all actuality, I've never heard no so many times in my life. I hear no all the time from funders when I approach funding. It doesn't matter how great our programs are, how big our impact, no. And these are different reasons why I hear no. You don't have a minimum of $500,000 or $1 million in the bank already, so we can't fund you. I'm like, hold up, I thought your mission was to close the wealth gap. So why is it that I already had to have $1 million in order to receive $1 million? That doesn't make any sense, it's a contradiction. And when that policy is put in place that the minimum has to be $500,000 or $1 million, that already marginalizes most of the local nonprofits in our communities because we don't have that much yet. And we can't get that much if that's the policy because no one's going to give it to us, right? The other reason why I hear no is that you do not have a long enough fiscal history. So if you're new, I don't know about you guys, but my parents didn't pass me down an inheritance because they're still trying to figure it out themselves, right? So a lot of times people of color, we're new entrepreneurs and we're just trying to get it together and get it started. And there's a history of black communities building wealth, like Black Wall Street, that when we did have something, it was taken from us. It was bombed, it was burned down, and no reparations were given. So a lot of times trying to get to the point where you have a long fiscal history, it's not as likely that we're going to have it than white nonprofits who have old money and been around for already 100 years, right? So that's another way that a lot of times we're marginalized and we're left out the funding game. The application is invite only, and you're not invited. So whenever I meet with a funder, I always ask them the same question. I look at who they fund, and I say, I'm noticing that you're not funding anyone from the communities that you're serving. Why? And what they tell me, well, one guy was extremely honest with me. It was an older white gentleman, and he said, I'm going to give you an honest answer, and you're not going to like my answer, but it's the truth. He said, we tend to give to people who look like us. That's just the way that it is. If you have funding, you would give to other black people. I'm white, I give to other white people. I'm not saying that it's right, but it's just the way the field is. And I met with another funder, and I didn't tell her who said this to me, but I told her, yeah, I heard this from another funder that this is the case. And she said, yep, sadly, he's right. It's a racist field, and it's just going to be hard for you to get in. But keep working hard, keep pushing. Eventually, something will come through for you. But again, this ties back to that stat I showed you in my previous slide. We're only getting 4% of all funding, and these are the reasons why. The last one is a reimbursement model, meaning that you got to front the cost yourself. So the grant could be for $1 million, but you got to be able to front $1 million first in order to get reimbursed $1 million, right? So again, that marginalizes a lot of the local organizations in our community because they don't have that money to front, so we're automatically left out the race, right? And this isn't by accident, this is intentional, right? This is a way to keep the money at the upper end of the wealth gap, and the crumbs that are falling is the 4%, right? That's actually coming down to the community for us to use for ourselves. So the way that I try to counteract this is that when I did receive my funding, I subcontracted 3 organizations from within the community. Sankofa Community Empowerment is running my men's rites of passage program. They're located in Bedford-Stuyvesant. Oceans and Rivers is running my women's rites of passage program. And X is running a civic engagement program. And also Honey Baked. Honey Baked is a Black-owned sandwich company. So whenever we have programs with our kids, they drop off healthy meals. And these are all local organizations within the community. And the plan wasn't just to contract them, but to also figure out how can we work together in a way that feels harmonious. I've been in a lot of schools and a lot of projects where there's a lot of partners in the building, and they're all tripping over each other. There's no real strategy in how to work together. With this, in this particular situation, we looked at each other's curriculum, looked at where things were aligned, and created shared goals and clear roles, where though we're all different, it still feels like one. And by getting the funding through my model, it helps get them a leg up where they have data and will be able to apply for funding on their own once they have enough time running their model with the students that we're working with. Exploitation. Exploitation, if this is happening and people are making a lot of money off of our skills, abilities, and pain, how can we turn that narrative around and capitalize off our own skills and our own abilities? So I created this initiative called The Table NYC. As I mentioned earlier, when I went to that town hall meeting and I made that announcement that the money is out there, I walked away with about 30 business cards. And all these business cards are from people within the community who had businesses and they were trying to figure it out. So I met with most of them. They were amazing people. I saw their programs and they're extremely impactful, but the one thing they all had in common was that they did not have the capacity to fundraise. They're working 3 jobs, and they're working with kids because they're passionate about it, but they don't really have the funds to do it full time. So the table, the reason why I call it The Table is this is about creating a table of our own. Instead of trying to sit at other people's tables, how can we create our own table and build wealth together and serve our own youth, right? So this initiative is going to start this spring. I applied for funding for it. I kept getting no's, so I'm funding it myself. One of the ways that I'm able to do this work is that I got the grant. I also sold my house, and that gave me the profit to be able to do this work full time without having to get another job. But also, I was able to create a donor advisory fund. And with the donor advisory fund, I'm doing it through the Brooklyn Community Foundation. I'm able to provide grants to these local organizations in the community for them to run their programs through my model. And after 1 year, they will have data that they'll be able to use to be able to grow on their own. So they can either continue to stay and work through the table, or they can grow on their own and fly on their own. Also part of the table is bartering our services. Money is always going to be important, but you can lessen the value of money if we're able to share what we're doing. Bedford-Stuyvesant, real estate is really tough. Some of these people have spaces, so maybe I can use your space if you come and you speak and do a free workshop for my students one day. And I have a whole system for that. I'm going to go through it right now, but there's a safe way to do that. So this is how we're counteracting exploitation. Cultural imperialism. So cultural imperialism is pretty much the ruling class. That's the dominant culture, and everyone has to adjust to that. So you guys have seen in the news and in social media how people can't get jobs because they have locks. The boy who couldn't walk across the stage for graduation because he wouldn't cut his locks off. Or the wrestler who couldn't wrestle until they cut his locks off before he went into the wrestling match. There's all these things that are happening to us that's telling us from this society that you're not accepted the way you are. If you don't conform to what the ruling class says to be, then you're not going to get hired. You're not going to be able to participate with everyone else, right? The education system is still Eurocentric. They're still teaching that Christopher Columbus discovered America, right? Our youth still aren't learning their history before slavery, before 1619. And there's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of history there. So the way that we're counteracting that is that all of our programs have a culturally responsive lens in all of them. This right here is a Sankofa bird. This is a West African symbol. And it means, how do you know where you're going if you don't know where you came from, right? Understanding your culture and valuing your culture is extremely important. And there's a lot of data out there that says that students who understand their cultural background perform better academically than those who don't, right? Cultural identity is so important that the first thing that they took from us when we stepped off the slave ship in 1619 was our identity. That was the first thing that had to go, right? You have to lose your names, your religions, your values, your rituals, your traditions. All that has to go because they can't make us a blank slate and they can't make us into who they want us to be until we forget who we are, right? So if that's the first thing that was taken, that also has to be the first thing that we get back, right? We have to get back who we are. And in St. Kofoberg, the literal translation of it is to go fetch. Go fetch it. When I first read go fetch, I said, I don't really like that word because, fetch is like, who wants to fetch anything? But it makes sense to me why the term is fetch because it's not given to us. It was not given to me. I was not taught these things. These are all things that I had to go find on my own. I literally had to go fetch my history. I had to go fetch my identity. We're the only people where we have to look for it. We had to get a DNA test to find out who our ancestors are. Who else has to get a DNA test to find out, who their great-great-great-grandma was, right? Powerlessness, this one is, I would say, the most dangerous out of the 5. Once it gets to the point where you feel like you don't have any power and there's nothing you can do to change anything, then game over. Nothing's ever going to change, right? So in working with my youth, one of the things that, in meeting with them, they had all these ideas, all these great ideas on things that they want to do in their community, things that they want to change, but every single conversation always ended with, well, it doesn't matter anyway. No one cares, and no one's listening, so what's the point, right? And it's not just our kids who are doing that, or a lot of adults, or there's been times when I've done that, like no one's going to listen, no one's going to care. So just trying to unpack that mindset with our youth has been a big project for me, getting them to understand and believe that things can change. And there are things you can do, and this is how you can do it, right? And understanding who they are. Understanding who they are has actually empowered them a lot to the point where now that they understand the history behind their communities and what's going on, and they're very clear on what's happening, they now know what to do to try to fix it. So this right here is one of my favorite pictures. These are 2 of my students who attend a research school called, not research school, a transfer school called Research and Services High School. A transfer school, for those of you who don't know, are for overage, undercredited kids. So these kids are the most marginalized out of all the marginalized kids because they failed, and this is like the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th chance at high school. And a lot of people say they're not going to be anything. You're not going to be anything, and you don't matter. This is one of my favorite pictures because these are some of the students that were telling me that no one cares. Nothing's ever going to change, right? Then after going through our process and going through our programs, we had a youth conference with 400 students there, and these 2 students performed and presented, and they were so powerful. They were so powerful, and they stood there, and they told all the kids to put their fists in the air, and 400 students in the auditorium all put their fists in the air at the same time. They told all the students to stand up, and all the kids stood up at the same time, right? That was powerful to see, because like these kids are powerful, but they just need someone to believe in them and to see them for who they are and to teach them who they are.